What's going on, guys? I've been having a lot of fun, great success implementing resistance bands heavily back into my training. And that's in large part because of you guys suggesting that I check out things like this X3 band bar platform type of system that honestly I was a little skeptical of. I've certainly used resistance bands in the past. I didn't really think of how much of a difference these would actually make, but I started to really fall in love with their simplicity and really specifically how they really engaged and gave off a certain desired amount of tension, having this kind of weight plate or board under your feet. And so after being a little skeptical of some of these things and kind of falling in love with them, I started gravitating and trying different things. I paid for most of these products, including even this handmade one, which I'll talk about this as well. But I got a chance to, in previous reviews, I can link down below, review the Clench Fitness Plate, talk about the X3 plate, and then a lot of you guys kept suggesting I check out the Harambe plate, so I did actually get this at a discount. I primarily was gonna make a separate video just on this, but I figured I could lump all these together and give you guys kind of my thoughts on the general pros and cons, because there are some pros and cons to each of these kind of setups on these kind of, I would say, the most popular type of platforms, even though this is a homemade one, but you guys might consider making a homemade one out of wood. There's one or two other ones I didn't get to, but I can link those down below if you guys are curious. But if you guys do consider picking any of these boards up and help support me and also get a great discount in the process, I will link some of the discount codes down below in the description box. And I'll get to it a little bit, but I won't stress it heavily. I do have a few of these homemade boards that my neighbor Mac made, and I'll talk about that as we kind of go along. But as you guys know, I'm gonna try and be as honest as possible. Like I said, I did pay for most of these boards, even including this homemade one. I kind of commissioned this one to get made for me. So what I'm gonna say here is certainly in my opinion, definitely wanna hear your guys' feedback and which ones you guys prefer. If I'm off on something, definitely down below in the comment section. But I never wanna review anything that I personally wouldn't pick up and purchase myself. So that's kind of the motivation to me investing in some of these. First thing I will say is when you guys got all these different platforms at your disposal, it's almost best if you didn't have that and you just stuck with one and you didn't have any difference, because there are subtle differences, subtle pros and cons to each. I think if you just bought one, you guys probably wouldn't notice much of a difference. So if you guys already have one of these platforms, I don't really think it's necessary to invest in a different one, because the differences are very subtle unless there's something major that I'm saying that you think might be attractive and warranting picking up another one. So I'll start first with the Harambe board, and I'm just gonna be going over basic pros and cons when I get to each one. Looking at the unboxing, this is the one that a lot of you guys said was the superior board compared to, say, like the X3. A lot of you guys said you like the wider platform, like the aesthetics of it, like the way the kind of the quality of the design and workmanship on it was. You can see I opted for the urban camo, very cool color. Out of the box, look at this, is like a slight con. There's some kind of slight dirt to it that was kind of ingrained in like almost the coloring. I don't know what it was, but it's kind of like some brown, little like, kind of looks like dirt marks. So you couldn't really rub it off. I think it's kind of into the board. Kind of a very minor thing. I didn't know it made a difference in cost, and I'll say that, but definitely the aesthetics of the urban camo was really cool. I opted to pick this one up. It has this kind of tapered edge, which can make a difference. Now, maybe I'll say this later. You know, sometimes when you got bands and you kind of have them draped around, say, a wider platform like the Clench Fitness one we'll get into, that can kind of make a difference, either prematurely, kind of having some extra slacks. You're starting kind of low as you do like initial pull off. And I always said too, it might even kind of prematurely wear and tear the bands if you say you got a lighter one on here and you're doing things like deadlifts or overhead presses or something like that. So this tapered function actually comes in really handy. It's very smooth, so this is not gonna cause any potential abrasion on the resistance band. When you flip it around, you can see that it is relatively versatile, that it has one center channel, much like the X3, and then it's got these two kind of end channels right here. There's not really an option here with this little crevice being cut off. Unless I'm kind of missing something, I'm not sure why this, maybe why this was there, probably just help kind of stability of just the overall function. But having some different channels like this, you can certainly loop bands on either shoulder. You can do things from like different angles and do a different kind of variety of curls or presses or whatever from different angles or line of actions that you're kind of setting up. They do advertise on their channel doing things like board presses. I actually tried on my homemade system that actually worked the best in my opinion, but here, this kind of gets in the way. If I want to do something, I put the band, say, in the center to do like more of a chest press. I have to kind of go a little bit higher and do more of like a decline chest press. So that's kind of one little minor con. Has a decent enough height off the ground so you could stack multiple bands and not have it worry about kind of overlapping or hitting against the ground. Some of the cons about this one, first and foremost, is going to be expensive. I would say pay special attention when you're looking at the colors. I did not realize this up front, and I kind of should have guessed that, but the urban camo right now goes for like $299, and then the black one is like $249. So even though I kind of got this at a slight discount, very grateful from Harambe for doing that, I probably would have gone with black. If I knew there was that much of a discount in price. That's something for you guys to consider, but this is certainly a very cool, attractive color. A very slight con, I would say, it's a little heavy. I mean, relative, we're talking about like my wood one, my homemade one, or even like the X3 is much lighter. But honestly, this thing, it's not that much heavier, to be honest with you guys. So a very slight con with that. Something that I'll mention, even with the Clench Fitness Plate specifically, but a tiny bit with my wood plate, is that I just say they're kind of slippery, and you'll kind of see some footage of this. When I was doing things like deadlifts or even some curls, I found that because this maybe is so smooth here to avoid abrasion on the resistance bands, it actually causes the band to kind of slip a little bit. Now that, I don't exactly know why that's the case. And sometimes it didn't do it. Had nothing to do with the sweat. It didn't have anything to do with different types of bands. I tried different things. You guys can let me know down below if that's the case. But definitely that was a big con, because if that did that all the time, that would be very annoying, especially for like deadlifts where you're pulling and all of a sudden there's like this uneven tension. So I found that only more so specifically with this board and this board. But again, it wasn't for every single exercise. It was more so with deadlifts, and I tried my best to kind of keep constant tension, but that was just a very minor con that was noticeable to me when I was comparing, especially working with like the X3. Now getting into the Clench Fitness, I did a whole separate review in this. You guys can check that out for more details. This thing is a beast. It's the heaviest of all the boards. This thing kind of reminds me of you know, Biff Tannen's hoverboard from Back to the Future 2 when he got that thing out. As far as when you compare all these boards together, this is your tank, this is your beast. It's the biggest one. It's made of a polymer plastic, and I think someone said when I did that review, like, oh, it's a lot of money for plastic. This is a heavy duty, plastic. I mean, you can tell the craftsmanship that went into this is, of all these different boards, this is probably the most sturdy, well-designed board. At least it seems that way. Well-designed is kind of relative, because I'll talk about that in a second in the cons, but getting into all the pros, it's definitely very versatile. That's probably the biggest thing. You have all these different channels. You got a center channel, a cross channel, and then these other channels going on right here. So the most versatile of all the boards, not to mention you have these little endpoints here that, yeah, you could say are like a functional handle, but I think you'd also could have loop bands around on these anchor points as well. So definitely the most versatile board. And as I said, the biggest board for your base and doing things if you want to have a wider base compared to all of these. You can look at the exact dimensions, but it's not a huge difference, but it definitely is wider this way. But you also have two different functions where, let's say you do want to go for a more of a narrow grip and have your feet kind of placed this way. You certainly could stand this way if you want to, and you got this double channel going across. So again, gives you guys more versatility. We're gonna transition to the cons a little bit. You could say it's kind of a pro, but also maybe a con, is that you can actually add some extra extension. These do not come stock with the unit. It's I think $20-something to get these extra extension points. If I didn't say at the start of this, I didn't say with this particular one. This was gifted to me from them, so very generous for them kind of letting me do this for the review. So very grateful for that. Going into that though, again, with the cons, you have to buy these extra extension points. That's gonna set you back a little bit. If you don't have this on, this thing does lie pretty flat. It's still functional, but if you're gonna loop multiple bands, that can kind of get in the way. But another con is gonna be its price tag. It's set at around $300. It says it's kind of on sale, but like I said in the previous video, I think that's where it's gonna stay. Also, again, this is the pro, can also be a con. It is, since it is, you know, bigger, you might not like that it's so big, you might not like that it's so heavy. And something I've been noticing a lot more is, like I said, compared with the Harambe, also has, because has a smooth groove here, I do notice that kind of slipping that I was discussing and things like deadlifts. But more specifically, a bigger concern to me that you could probably fix with just some grip tape is this plastic surface maybe needs to be broken in a little bit more. And I'm sure you could put some sort of solution on here to avoid it, but it is very slick. So when I had a fairly new pair of shoes on here doing things like even overhead squats or just squats in general, I found my feet wanting to kind of slide a little bit and didn't have much of a grip to this platform. You could put grip tape on here or something like that, but that's just, again, a little kind of a minor con. And unlike the Harambe that has a taper, this does not have a taper. So if you have a band, a regular 41-inch band, and you loop it around here, you're starting already, again, with some kind of low slack to the ground if you're doing things like deadlifts. Like I said, could prematurely wear and tear the band or just kind of set you up with a little more difficulty in the initial pull. So that's the overall pros and cons with this one. Getting into the X3, this thing kind of looks like kind of a baby compared to holding those other ones, but that's kind of what it's got going for it in the fact that it's much smaller, it's more compact, it's more of a simplistic, practical design. This one I know is made in the USA. I didn't mention this. I'm pretty sure the Clench Fitness Plate is made in the USA. I am not sure about Harambe. I did not see it advertised on their website, but I know this one is made in the USA for whatever that's worth. Getting back to it, very lightweight, easy to travel. If I was gonna travel or go somewhere, go to the park, you could throw this in a gym bag easily. It's not incredibly heavy. It does have some little padding down here, but I think it does say in the directions to recommend doing it on some sort of a kind of a nice, less abrasive force. So I actually have little mats, mini mats that I'll put on the ground if I'm going on cement. So that's something just to consider if you're using this one. Now we're getting into some kind of personal preferences here. I actually like the narrow base. Some of you guys might not like that. I specifically like how the band tension is diverted. When you're standing kind of narrow, it's just closer to your body, closer to your feet. And I just like the way that tension is kind of diverted. And that problem I was discussing about these bands kind of slipping on the side for things like deadlifts on pretty much almost all these plates. Even the wooden one has a little more friction, but still does it a tiny bit. This one has it the least. So I know this was a big concern for most people. And I mentioned this in my first video with them, was that this was kind of abrasive and was actually prematurely wearing and tearing in the bands. I don't think it does. That's just my personal thing. I noticed I did a lot of damage to the bands initially because it did not have constant tension. But since then, I've used this weight plate with various different bands, a bunch of different companies. I'm gonna make a future video on that. And they've had no wear and tear whatsoever, no premature wear and tear. It's either the bands either the band layering themselves, the X3 bands, which I think is still very good bands. I think that might have been the case. I don't think it was. I just think the biggest wear and tear I had in those bands initially was in that first week of me not keeping constant tension on this weight plate. So just be mindful of that. Plus it's gonna add a better workout to you guys in the first place if you do keep constant tension, going a little bit slower pace. But I will say the good thing it has going for it is I don't have any of that slipping I talked about when I was doing things like deadlifts. The bands stayed exactly where they were. They weren't uneven. I don't think it has anything to do with like sweat or them getting kind of like having kind of moisture or humidity. I think it's just kind of this smooth surface. So I actually think this little kind of aggressive, not as smooth surface played a good role in that. People said to be mindful of this area here cutting. I don't know if they fixed it on the newer ones, but again, no issue about that. I would just be mindful if you are gonna put resistance bands on here to avoid the corners because that might prematurely kind of cut the bands. Finally, this is another personal preference for me. I just aesthetically like the way this looks. Maybe just because of my first one I got, but I just like the way this thing kind of looks and feels overall. And then getting into the cons of the X3 platform, the biggest one is that this thing comes in a set. You cannot buy this thing individually, unlike these other ones. Granted, these other ones are definitely expensive. So I know the biggest pushback I was getting when I first talked with X3, which was my initial pushback, was that the system was very expensive. But when you start comparing that, even in all these companies, you're looking at $300-ish just for the platform alone. Considering this thing can cost you, $50 or $500, if that, maybe it's not such a big deal, but that's considering that this also, when you consider the manufacturing quality of all these different weight plates, probably not as high end as these ones. So I'll lump that in kind of like into the cost, and then I'll say possible con, like still could be a concern. I'm just saying at this point, I don't think it is. Could be the possible issue of the abrasion or wear and tear of this type of setup. Again, the pros that I like might be a con for you. The fact that this thing is small, has a smaller kind of footprint, you might want a wider base. Definitely a con of this one, it has the most limited functionality. It's just one central channel. There is no kind of cross channel going on here. And then getting into this homemade one, this was something that my neighbor Mac, who I featured in a couple different videos, I told him when I first got this one, I'm like, hey, could you make something like this? And I kind of gave him the dimensions and kind of what I was kind of looking for. He does a lot of woodwork in his basement. He has a bunch of equipment for that. He went ahead and did that. And I said, why don't I make some other ones in case someone else might be interested in that. So we do have some of those. If you guys are interested, you can check the description box or just email me if you guys are interested. I got a few of these. I let this out first to my YouTube members. And so some of them have already been called for. But basically this took him, even though it looks relatively easy, I know this took him, he told me about 4 hours each board. He put a lot of work and detail into this. I think when you consider like 4 coats of lacquer, he took the board and smoothed the edges over, had to make sure and sanded these things to make sure they didn't wobble. I don't find any wobbling, but they might over time have some wear and tear. But the point about a pro is about a simple board or a DIY board, I'll just say in general, is the fact you can kind of make it to your own specifications. I kind of like the wood. This wood, he told me you can drive a truck over it. I like the basic dimensions. And even though it's so basic, the way I kind of had him kind of create it, and he also just kind of used his own ingenuity with this, was that it's very simplistic and still very versatile. I can use this cross channel. I can still put bands this way in all sorts of directions. I was doing things like banded, like just chest presses, even heavy ones like the X3's like Elite band. And that felt actually really good doing just chest presses on my back on this thing. Of course, I know this thing was made in the USA. It was a handmade item, so that feels pretty cool when I just aesthetically like looking at it. And there's something weird. This is not necessarily with this, but when you're standing on all these platforms, just that connection point it feels with your feet. And I'll just say with this one, I like that. I kind of like when I'm standing, it just feels like you're kind of like standing on like a wood, like a deck. But if you're getting into like cons of making your own kind of homemade board, especially something out of wood, the big thing would be, yeah, over time, would there be some gradual wear and tear? Would the kind of the sanding area, would this kind of be kind of worn out? So when I use this thing, I am kind of babying it. I'm not throwing this thing around or avoiding this kind of getting scraped. You certainly could put some like grip tape or padding on here as well. I'm sure there's some other platforms that are out there. There's another company called Rocka.fit that people were talking about, a really fairly inexpensive platform for what you're getting. It seems to be relatively low to the ground. I don't know. I just didn't go ahead and spend money on that. I think I invested enough for this review, and this is enough boards, honestly, for me to kind of go through practically, but that would be another option if you're looking for like a low cost of entry board to pick up. So in wrapping this up, if you guys are looking at picking up your own board, definitely ask me if you guys have any specific questions. Ask people down in the comment section since we got this kind of big summary here going on. But definitely just pick out the board do you think practically fits you. Do you want a smaller frame board? Do you want a wider one? Do you want one that has maximum versatility like the Clench Fitness? Also depends on the price point you want to put into it. If you feel like you're gonna be fairly committed to it, you got enough money to spend, I would opt for one of the more higher quality, more expensive build boards. If you're looking at kind of jumping into it, kind of testing the waters, then I would say go more of like a kind of a lower price point type of option. You don't have to invest in expensive bands. Like, I mean, said these like cheap SunPow bands on Amazon. I have these. These are relatively good, but there's obviously the quality of bands makes a difference in the systems you're going to set up. X3, of course, this comes in a set. You also got to pay for like the actual bar system you want to pick up. The Harambe, if you guys are curious why I didn't pick that up, guys, I just didn't have a whole lot of money to drop, even though he was giving me a discount. The owner of the company was very generous. I just didn't want to invest all that money in the Harambe, so none of you guys were asking about that. I also really love, my personal preference is X3 bar. So I feel like if I had that, I probably would still be going to this. I like this distance. I use it for a bunch of multiple things. But if you want a cheaper alternative, there is, of course, the whole Instar bar type of setup. This is basic big carabiner clips. I tried this. I said before, I'm not a huge fan of this for a number of reasons. I don't want to get into it too much, but I do notice just it's a little more kind of more wobbly. It has more of a slipping effect. I've noticed in other boards or in other bars. So that's just kind of my personal preference. You guys might be up to that, but that's certainly a low cost entry way of getting some sort of a bar and trying these things out. And then even this Jay Bryant bar, I keep saying it is definitely not near the quality of an X3 bar. It functionally gets a job done. It's a little annoying that these things can kind of move around a little bit as far as like keeping totally dead center. It's got extra slack here, so that can be good for having these wider base boards where you kind of get the premature slack, so that makes maybe kind of pay off a little bit. But this is just a low cost thing to kind of consider. And also there's fabric here, so I always think over time maybe this might wear and tear and rub out. But again, you're kind of getting what you pay for on pretty much everything here. And then also you don't need bars. You could just opt for a pair of gloves. Me personally, going from both, gloves are certainly cool. Once I've kind of tried the bar, I was very skeptical at first. I don't think I'd go back. I definitely like having the bar with these platforms just in general with my resistance band training. But if you want to do something kind of low cost, these Bear Grip gloves are definitely awesome. I reviewed these in the past. I'll link these down below as well. But if it were me and I had to do it all over again, if someone came to my house and stole all this stuff from me and I had to buy a setup again, meaning like the bands, the bar, and the platform, which one would I pick up? You guys are gonna hate this answer. I didn't think I would say this answer, totally honest, but of all the ones I kind of like the most, it's the X3. This is just my personal preference. I like the narrow kind of foot plate. I know it's expensive overall for a system, but if I didn't really like this bar so much, I wouldn't nearly even kind of consider or kind of give this thing a lot of credence if it was a bad bar and this platform. But I like both of them. I really love this bar. And so that's one thing. And also I think their bands are awesome too. And I think for the band quality and what you're getting as a package, I don't think it's necessarily a big overhead price point, but certainly price point, however you guys like it. These are just my own personal thoughts. If you guys have any questions, comments, feedback, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.